listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are engaging in something they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. You can talk to me about the things that seem too messy or weird or stigmatized to share with your best friend or your spouse or even your therapist. I offer non-judgmental coaching via Zoom, which means we can work together no matter where you're located. To schedule an introductory coaching session with me, go to my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I can't wait to speak with you. All right, today's episode is a follow-up to the two recent episodes about guilt and shame and perfectionism. After I recorded those episodes, I realized that I wanted to be more specific about the ways that perfectionistic thinking and the feelings that can arise from perfectionistic thinking can impact your infidelity situation and your whole life for that matter. But since this is a show about infidelity, we're going to talk about the infidelity situation factor. The belief that we have to be perfect in order to be worthy, whatever perfect may mean, even if we know that perfection isn't truly possible, and the feelings of guilt and shame that come with this kind of thinking are sneaky thieves. If we stay stuck in these kinds of thoughts and feelings, we have a lot to lose. And the worst part is we may not even realize what's going on when it's happening, and we may not even realize what we're losing. Brené Brown, who I'm sure you've heard of since she's very famous, talks about how when we believe who we should be is more important than who we are, we tend to hustle for our worth, as she puts it. She talks about hustling for our worth. And the actions involved in hustling for our worth may take the form of people pleasing or trying to meet specific external standards or attempting to be perfect, whatever that may mean to us, even if we know there's no such thing as perfection, so that we never have to fear that we aren't worthy of belonging or love or acceptance or feeling okay about ourselves. And when we hustle for our worth, we lose out on being who we are. And everyone around us loses out on experiencing us as who we are. Although when we're hustling for our worth, in Brené Brown's language, or trying to be perfect or trying to meet external standards, we're usually trying to find love and belonging. The awful irony is that when we take these actions, we alienate ourselves from ourselves and we alienate ourselves from others. So in other words, we end up getting the opposite result from the one we want. And I'm talking about Brené Brown's concept of hustling for our worth because, as I said, she's really famous and a lot of people have become familiar with this idea of hers. And I do think it's a good way of characterizing what some of us do when we're stuck in perfectionistic thinking and the feelings that of guilt or shame or unworthiness that come with perfectionistic. But in addition to hustling for our worth, there's another possibility I want to draw your attention to as well. In addition to, or instead of hustling for our worth when we're in perfectionistic thinking, we may hide. We may hide from specific situations. We may hide from specific people, or we may hide from pretty much everyone and everything. We may hide from ourselves. We may hide from our lives. And when we hide from the world may respond by letting us hide. When we withdraw from our relationships, we may remove ourselves from the kinds of interactions we crave the most. And we may believe this is happening because there's something wrong with us. But what's really happening is that we think there's something wrong with us. And as a result, we absent ourselves from our lives and our relationships. And then we interpret all of this as evidence that we are indeed unworthy and unlovable and don't belong. So, what I'm getting at here, what I kind of stumbled over, what I was trying to say earlier is we can hide and hustle for our worth. These are not mutually exclusive tendencies. Some of us may do more hiding, some of us may do more hustling for our worth, but there's certainly things that can be done in conjunction with each other when we're feeling shame over not being quote unquote perfect. And if you're listening to me talk about these tendencies and recognizing that you've engaged in them before, or maybe you're engaging in them right now, you know that this stuff feels terrible. Both of these options I'm describing feel terrible. Hustling for your worth feels awful. Slinking away in shame and believing your self imposed isolation is proof that you really are fatally flawed feels awful, right? But maybe you don't recognize these sorts of behaviors in yourself. And who knows? Maybe you aren't engaging in them and maybe you haven't engaged in them. But at any rate, I'm going to offer some examples of what hustling for your worth or avoiding life and relationships because you're ashamed of being imperfect may look like, so that you may be able to identify this in yourself if you've got this going on and then do something about it. And I will, of course, talk about infidelity related examples, but let me digress for a moment first. I've been watching the Olympics lately, the Winter Olympics. By the time you listen to this, they'll be over. But I've been reminded over and over again in my viewings that even when athletes train for years, even when they reach the highest levels of excellence in their sports, they are still going to have epic flops in front of millions of viewers worldwide from time to time. Just because they are really, 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 really ridiculously good at what they do does not mean they're perfect. Just because these athletes have achieved exquisite degrees of expertise does not mean they execute every single thing they do perfectly. That's point number one. And I think it's just so awesome in the literal sense of awesome, not in the like positive connotation of awesome, to remember that. And point number two is if they weren't willing for this to be the case, if they weren't willing to flop on television, for instance, we would never get to watch them do the amazing things they do from the comfort of our couches. If nobody was willing to fall down in public or be imperfect in public, no one would ever win a gold medal in anything. Think about that for a minute. In order for any athlete to win a gold medal, they have to be willing to quote unquote perform poorly when they're trying their hardest to do well. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is even more impressive than the athletic feats they complete that garner their gold medals or bronze medals or silver medals or what, like any, like any placement for that matter in the Olympics, just participating in the Olympics, right? These athletes have the courage to get out there and do their best, knowing they could quote unquote fail very publicly and sometimes doing exactly that, and having to deal with all of their thoughts and feelings about not performing the way they wanted to, right? And meanwhile, we sit from the comfort of our homes and critique the way they look in their outfits. Or we say, like, we don't like the way they talk, or like they did such a bad job, or whatever it is that we say, right? So I think all of this is amazing. And I really want to underscore that being willing to quote unquote fail publicly and be critiqued by millions of strangers as you do so is a requirement of doing something amazing, like participating in the Olympics or winning an Olympic medal. And I want to emphasize that there's no such thing as being so good at anything that you never mess up or do something quote unquote imperfectly. God, I'm having a hard time forming words today. I'm sorry if this is unclear. I hope I'm intelligible enough to make this episode worthwhile. And on top of these points, I also really want to emphasize that many of us beat ourselves up for being quote unquote imperfect at things we have never done before and have never been taught how to do. Like, for example, figuring out how to handle an infidelity situation, right? Even Olympians with excellent coaches and rigorous training regimes aren't going to execute their feats perfectly every time. When we are attempting to pull off a life maneuver we've never attempted before and never trained for, isn't it kind of understandable that we might not know how the hell to approach it, much less be able to execute it well? Right? At many, if not most, points in our lives, we're all beginners. We are all learning as we go. Most of us aren't automatically adept at navigating love and sexuality and relationships, even under the easiest of conditions, whatever easiest of conditions may even mean. And when things get slightly complicated or extremely complex, we may have no idea what we're doing. So, how could we possibly handle our lives, our love lives, quote unquote, perfectly? How could we possibly be, quote unquote, perfect in relationships? I really want you to consider those questions. I know there's a lot of messaging out there that suggests we should actually be perfect in some sort of literal sense in our relationships. And I know there's a lot of messaging about what being perfect in a relationship means in practice. For instance, a lot of messages out there tell us that cheating on someone you've committed to is definitely not perfect, right? So, if we're going to crawl out from under the crushing weight of other people's expectations and other people's ideas about what it means to be okay or good enough in relationships or in any other areas of our lives, and if we're going to be able to crawl out from underneath the weight of our own perfectionistic thinking, we have to be willing to examine our operating assumptions about what it means to be perfect, what we have to do in order to be worthy of love and belonging, or worthy of deeming ourselves acceptable human beings. And we have to be willing to change our beliefs if they aren't serving us. And that can certainly take effort and a willingness to practice new ways of thinking, new ways of relating to our feelings, and new ways of doing things. But the great news is it's totally possible, and I can help you do it. So, with that in mind, let's talk about how perfectionistic thinking and the shame and guilt and unworthiness that can come with it may impact your love life. Here's an example of hustling for your worth or trying to feel better about yourself by attempting to be quote unquote perfect. That comes up pretty often. And let me just be clear that when I say perfect, I talked about this in one of the previous episodes. I mean some mythical version of perfect that you know doesn't actually exist, but you strive for anyway. Sometimes people attempt to be unassailable or believe that they have to be unassailable in order to be acceptable or lovable or worthy. And we may not use these exact words when we're talking to ourselves. So please don't disregard the concepts I'm talking about here, even if the language you use with yourself is a little different. Okay. Okay. Good. Back to my example. So the example that I hadn't even started yet. So this is the example of hustling for your worth that comes up pretty often. So you're in a committed relationship and you've cheated and your partner has found out about it and you feel really bad about it. Maybe your partner is very hurt and they're telling you this. And maybe you feel bad that they're hurting and you believe that you caused their pain. Or maybe your partner is really angry with you and they're telling you this, and you really don't like it when people are angry with you. And maybe you feel ashamed of getting caught or ashamed that this whole thing has come to light. Or maybe you've got some of all of those things going on. Now, in this sort of situation, people's underlying default belief is often that they've done something wrong, or they've done something they shouldn't have, or they've done something bad. And when we believe things like that, we usually feel worried or maybe fearful or perhaps unworthy or ashamed or guilty or a feeling somewhere along those lines. And these are feelings that most of us don't like feeling at all. For most of us, these feelings are really uncomfortable. They feel terrible. And feeling them seems like an emergency that needs to be taken care of right away. So often we think that if we feel shame, it's an indication that we've done something that we need to be ashamed of. And the way to deal with that is to get rid of the feeling of shame. And one way that people do this is by frantically trying to make things better with their spouse or their primary partner or whoever it was they cheated on. And so maybe they hurriedly promise to end the affair, or maybe they end the affair. Or if the infidelity situation wasn't an affair per se, whatever it was, they put a stop to that behavior or those behaviors. And then they try to be the perfect spouse or the perfect partner because they want their partner to forgive them and trust them and love them so that they can feel okay about themselves again, so that they can stop feeling ashamed, so that they can stop feeling nervous about their worth or their place in the relationship. And sometimes people do this pretty intentionally. Sometimes people tell me that their conscious intention is to try to make their spouse love them again so that they can feel safe or secure or whatever it is that they want to feel. But sometimes this sort of behavior is much less conscious. Sometimes it's more of a knee-jerk reaction to feeling feelings like shame and unworthiness, which, like I said a moment ago, usually feel terrible and we often try to solve for. But whether you're doing it consciously or not so consciously, frantically attempting to please your partner in the hope that doing so will relieve you of your discomfort is very different from deciding you want to re-engage in your primary relationship and make amends with your partner after you've cheated, right? So maybe you cheat and your partner finds out, and there's this whole moment of reckoning, and you come to a very conscious decision that you want to take more responsibility for how you participate in the relationship and give the relationship another try and see what happens. And doing this can be great, right? But people often dive into this sort of partner pleasing endeavor without knowing whether they really want to stay in their marriage or their primary relationship or not, or without even having made a clear decision about whether or not they want to try to reinvest in their relationship or not. They might have had 1 foot out the door before the cheating was discovered. They might have had like 1.5 feet out the door before the cheating was discovered. But now they feel so bad about having done a quote unquote bad thing that all they can think about is not having anyone think of them as bad for another excruciating second. And this keeps some people hustling for their worth in relationships they don't necessarily want to stay in, right? It keeps some people from allowing themselves to honestly consider what they really want in their love life. When we're terrified of being the so-called bad person who has hurt other people or the bad person who did something they weren't supposed to do, it may seem really logical to try and be good instead of bad and to try and make people happy instead of having them be angry with us or hurt by our behavior. This sort of approach can sound so well-intentioned, but I want to point out that it's a form of perfectionistic thinking. And when we're operating from these sorts of beliefs, we can compromise our ability to be honest with ourselves. When we can't be honest with ourselves, how on God's green earth are we going to be able to be honest with anyone else? Right? So you've got to ask yourself who this kind of partner pleasing behavior ultimately helps. You frantically trying to make your partner feel better after they found out you've been cheating on them might be something they appreciate in the short run, perhaps. But is this a sustainable strategy for anything good? Not necessarily. Okay, now let's talk about slinking away in shame using a similar example scenario. Let's say you're married and you had an affair and your spouse found out about the affair and got really upset and blamed you for ruining their life and ruining your kids' lives, right? In this version of the example, there are kids. You may have felt really bad about the pain your spouse experienced, and you may have believed that you caused them that pain and believed that therefore it was up to you to do whatever they wanted in the divorce. So you let them have custody of your kids, even though you didn't really want them to have full custody. But you convinced yourself that was a good idea because you felt bad about the hurt you'd caused or the hurt you believed you'd caused. And you were afraid your kids would just blame you for breaking up the family anyway. And then you're like, well, hell, if I'm not going to be around, like if I'm not really part of this family anymore, I might as well move, maybe across the country, maybe to another country, or maybe not that far away, but just to a place that it's really hard to get to, hard for you to journey to see your kids from this location, right? This sort of thing happens a lot. And often people think they're doing the right thing of some sort by kind of slinking out of the picture of the family after they've cheated, if the cheating was the impetus for a divorce. Sometimes people think of this as a way of making amends for the bad thing they did. They think that, well, my ex-spouse is really mad at me. Like the kids may be really mad at me too. Maybe the best thing for everyone involved is for me to just get the hell out of the picture. But who does this really benefit? For example, does it benefit your kids? Probably not. They may want you in their life no matter what you've done or not done. They may not care at all that you haven't been perfect. They may just want to be around you because you are you, right? And even if they are mad at you because they think you screwed up, does that mean you have to slink away in shame? No. You may not be perfect, but guess what? Neither is their other parent or anyone else on the planet for that matter. Yeah, the idea that cheating is worse than any other offense is out there in the world. And your ex-spouse might believe it and might tell your kids that. But what do you gain and what does your family gain from you acquiescing to that belief, from you agreeing with that belief? In the short term, it may be easier for you to slink away in shame. It may relieve you of the challenge of having to construct a self-concept that includes having done something that some people think is bad. It may mean you have to do some things that, if you're slinking away, it may mean that you get to relieve yourself of having to do some things that scare you, like showing up in your family when people are talking about you or everybody seems to be mad at you. But in the long run, who wins from you withdrawing yourself from your life and from the important relationships? All right. The last example consequence of perfectionistic thinking I'm going to mention today is giving up on a relationship you really want to pursue because of what other people think about it or might think about it. For instance, sometimes people who are the other person, meaning they are involved with someone who is ostensibly committed to someone else, will tell me that they can't tell their person that they really want to have an official relationship with them because if their person ever left their family, they, meaning the other person, would always be blamed for having caused the breakup of their person's family. Now, I'm not going to suggest that there is, the making of a long-term partnership in every affair. But some very successful relationships do begin as affairs. And even if this sort of scenario may be a little awkward, a little sticky in some ways, especially at first, in the long run, these kinds of situations can and do work themselves out. It is also true that sometimes when someone leaves their marriage to be with their affair partner, the spouse who gets cheated on gets very angry and stirs up a big ruckus. But here's the problem. A lot of people who are in the other person position let that possibility prevent them from ever telling their person that they really love them and would like to have a non-covert relationship with them and from ever giving that relationship a shot, right? Now, of course, there is the other party, like in the covert couple here that has a role in this too. Of course, I'm just talking about this from the other person's perspective for the sake of simplicity. But of course, it takes two to tango, right? It takes the other person too to say, yeah, I want to do that, right? Now, I mean, just to get back to the point here, though, it's true that if your relationship starts out as an affair or starts out while one person is ostensibly committed to someone else, people may have opinions about it and about you. But again, this is just the way that some relationships start, whether people like it or not. And we have to remember that it's also true that opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. Some of them stink. And it's true that other people love to judge others for their behavior rather than taking responsibility for their own nonsense, right? I could go on, but my point is that the sneaky fear of being perfect or not doing something wrong or meeting other people's standards for good behavior can get in the way of pursuing what we really want in life. When we say things like, well, I don't want to be, responsible for breaking up someone else's family. What we really mean is, I don't want to be blamed for breaking up with someone else's family, breaking up someone else's family. I don't want other people to think those kinds of thoughts about me. Because can you actually break up someone else's family? No, you can't. Yes, people might blame you for doing that. They might say that you've done that. But no, that is not actually how it works. So be careful of ideas that sound really noble, like, well, I don't want to, push too hard for us to have an above ground relationship because I don't want to be responsible for breaking up someone else's family. Those ideas may sound like you're just doing the right thing and that there's nothing more to it than that. But they may be more about you trying to avoid anyone else thinking that you've done something wrong than anything else. Now, let me be clear, since I know people get really touchy about this topic that I've just covered, I want to make it clear that I am not advocating for recklessly inconsiderate behavior here. That's never what I'm advocating for. I'm not saying, hey, people, go get involved with someone who's already partnered and has a family and find a way to get them to leave their current family. That's not my point. But we need to be really aware of how we consider some things sacrosanct and what the consequences of that thinking can be. So, for instance, I've just been using the language of leaving a family and breaking up a family. But just because a couple gets divorced doesn't mean that the party who initiated the divorce left the family. They may have ended the romantic partnership, but that doesn't mean they have left the family. Some people actually end up being far more involved with their kids and their ex-spouse after they get divorced. Sometimes divorce is the best thing that ever happens to a family. So many of us have visions of what family is supposed to be like. But in practice, families take many different forms, and so many families successfully reconfigure themselves. And moreover, it is possible for families to reconfigure themselves, right? And there's so much more we could say about that topic, but that's it for now. The point is just that, like, talking about pursuing a relationship because you want to, even if a relationship has a complicated beginning, is something that, how can I say this? It's something that some of us just have to take a chance on, right? If we're going to live out the most honest, authentic versions of our lives. And it doesn't have to be a terrible thing for anyone involved. Okay. Many of us, and actually some would say all of us, really want a sense that we are worthy of love and belonging and acceptance. And some people would say that humans are hardwired to desire these things. But I'm not a biological determinist, so I don't like to use those kinds of terms. But I do think it's important to recognize that the desire for belonging, the desire for acceptance, the desire for feeling worthy of love these desires are very common and they're very human, right? And wanting these things is not a problem. The problem, though, is that we often think, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously, that being perfect, quote unquote, is how we're going to get those things. The problem is that we think that meeting other people's standards is what will get us the love, the belonging, the acceptance, and the proof that we're worthy. But being perfect isn't the way to get there. Learning how to love ourselves, not in spite of our so-called imperfections, but because of them, will help us get there. Learning how to create our own sense of certainty that we're worthy of love, of belonging, or of anything else will help us get there. Learning how to create our own sense of safety will help us get there. We tend to depend on others for this stuff, for love, for belonging, for a sense of safety or worthiness or security. We tend to want others to show us that we're worthy of these things or affirm that we're worthy of these things. And don't get me wrong, relationships with other people can be a wonderful source of all of this stuff. Of course they can. But it's difficult, if not impossible, to receive these kinds of things from others if we don't love and accept ourselves first. It's difficult to create the kinds of relationships many of us truly want to have when we rely on others for our sense of self-worth, right? Working our way out of perfectionism and the shame and guilt and worthlessness that comes with it, and all of the actions we attempt to take to free ourselves from those feelings is totally possible. Many of us have learned to think in perfectionistic terms. We've learned to hustle for our worth. We've learned to slink away in shame if we do something that other people don't like or that we ourselves don't think is great. But we don't have to keep doing that. And this may mean learning new ways of thinking, new ways of dealing with our feelings, and then new ways of taking action in our lives, right? But number one, it's totally possible to learn how to do these things, even if you haven't learned yet. And number two, I can help you do it. And the value of doing this work is that we get to experience our romantic relationships and our whole lives for that matter in a totally different way. But here's the really cool thing. It doesn't stop there. The benefits of dealing with our perfectionistic thinking and learning how to deal with shame and unworthiness and guilt in different ways don't stop with us. When we show other people that it's possible to shed our shame, it's possible to love and accept ourselves, even when we haven't met every standard, even when we've done things that we aren't 100% proud of, we help heal the collective. I'm not exaggerating when I say that when we show others that we can forgive ourselves, when we show up fully in our lives, despite the fact that we are not perfect, we help heal the world. We show other people what's possible too. So many of us do things that perpetuate cycles of pain and suffering when we're feeling terrible about ourselves, right? And when we can find our way out of that, we show others that it's possible for them too. We help lead the way. When we can free ourselves from what Tara Brach calls the trance of unworthiness, we're able to live better. And we're able to help other people see that it's possible for them to do so too. And what could be better than that? All right. That's it for today, everyone. If you're grappling with infidelity and perfectionism and shame and guilt and unworthiness and partner pleasing and all of that other good stuff, let's talk. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard today, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate and review the show on iTunes. As always, I thank you so much for listening. Have a fantastic week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.